Alex and Sarah Mitchell were the kind of couple everyone admired. On the surface, they seemed to have it all. Alex was a seasoned airline pilot, known for his professionalism and calm demeanor. He had spent years flying internationally, earning a reputation for being dependable and skilled. Sarah, his wife, was a vibrant, outgoing woman who worked as a marketing executive. She had a career that was thriving, and friends often described her as warm, approachable, and full of life. The couple was well-traveled, well-educated, and appeared to have a loving, perfect relationship. To the outside world, they were the embodiment of a successful marriage. The two met in college, where they both excelled in their respective fields. Alex was passionate about aviation from a young age, and Sarah was drawn to the world of business and communication. Their shared love of adventure and travel brought them closer over the years, and after a few years of dating, they decided to marry. It seemed like the ideal partnership. They had similar interests, similar life goals, and the same vision of the future. Their wedding, a small but elegant affair in a scenic coastal town, was the talk of the town. Friends and family remarked on how perfect they were for each other, how they seemed to complete each other. However, despite their outward perfection, cracks began to form in their relationship. It was subtle at first, moments when Alex seemed distant or Sarah's smiles appeared to be tinged with exhaustion. Alex's job as a pilot took a toll on their marriage. His long hours away from home, frequent international flights, and demanding schedule began to strain their connection. He was often too tired or too focused on his career to give Sarah the attention she craved. She, in turn, felt increasingly isolated, struggling to balance her own career with the feeling that her marriage was drifting away. In private, Sarah began to confide in a few close friends about her growing concerns. She spoke of feeling lonely, neglected, and even worried about Alex's growing obsession with his job. It was clear that their once passionate relationship had begun to fade into something more like an arrangement. Though Sarah made efforts to reignite the spark, Alex seemed to withdraw even further, becoming less communicative and more preoccupied with work. In her heart, Sarah suspected something deeper was at play, something that neither she nor anyone else could quite put into words. Despite the growing tension, they both tried to maintain the appearance of a perfect couple. They continued to attend social events together, smiled for photos, and talked about future plans. Alex would often reassure her that it was just a phase, that things would get better once he had more time off. Yet, every time he returned from a trip, the distance between them seemed to widen. Even when they were together, there was an unspoken barrier that Sarah couldn't quite cross. In her quieter moments, she wondered if something more was going on behind the scenes, but she never allowed herself to fully confront the possibility. It wasn't until much later, when the investigation into Sarah's tragic death began, that the full extent of Alex's secrets would be revealed. At the time, however, everyone continued to believe in the facade. The Mitchells were the golden couple, and no one could have imagined the dark truth lurking just beneath the surface, waiting to shatter everything. It was a sunny morning when Alex and Sarah Mitchell boarded the plane for what should have been a routine flight from Los Angeles to Tokyo. Alex, the seasoned pilot, was at the helm, and Sarah, his wife, was flying with him as a passenger. The flight had been planned for months as a way for the couple to reconnect after a challenging few months. Sarah had been feeling the strain of their growing distance, and Alex, recognizing the need for a break from his hectic schedule, had arranged the trip as a chance to spend some quality time together. The early stages of the flight were uneventful. The plane took off smoothly, ascending into the sky with a familiar hum. At 300 feet, the plane settled into its cruising altitude, and the passengers, most of them oblivious to the deeper currents beneath the surface of the Mitchells' marriage, settled into their seats. For the first time in weeks, Sarah allowed herself to relax, hopeful that this journey would help bridge the gap that had formed between her and Alex. But as the hours passed, something started to feel off. Sarah began to experience a strange sensation, dizziness, nausea, and an overwhelming sense of weakness. At first, she brushed it off as typical discomfort from the altitude, something she had experienced before on flights. She sipped water, tried to distract herself with her book, and hoped the feeling would pass. However, it didn't. The nausea intensified, and her head felt as if it were spinning. She grew pale, her face flushed, and the unease deepened into something much more alarming. Alex, on the other hand, appeared outwardly calm. He was in his element, managing the flight with his usual precision, all while his wife's condition worsened in a way that couldn't be ignored. Sarah struggled to breathe, her chest tightening as she felt as though the air itself had thickened around her. She signaled for a flight attendant, but the flight attendants, busy with their own tasks, didn't seem to notice the urgency in her distress. By the time one of them reached her, Sarah was in a state of panic, her breath shallow and her body trembling uncontrollably. From the cockpit, Alex was fully aware of the situation, but his reaction was disconcertingly composed. He calmly relayed a request to the flight crew for medical assistance upon landing, explaining that his wife was feeling ill. To the flight attendants and the few other passengers who overheard the exchange, it seemed like a minor issue, a couple of days of food poisoning perhaps, or a common air sickness that would clear up once the plane touched down. No one suspected that this was no ordinary medical emergency. What no one knew, however, was that Alex had planned this moment with chilling precision. The poisoning of his wife had been carefully orchestrated. Over the course of weeks leading up to the flight, he had secretly administered a slow-acting, undetectable poison into Sarah's food and drink during their everyday life. The poison, designed to mimic the symptoms of common altitude sickness, had been carefully timed. On this particular flight, the substance would take full effect, incapacitating Sarah at the peak of their journey, where no one could intervene. As Sarah's condition worsened, Alex maintained an eerie calm. He made no attempt to rush the plane's descent or signal for an emergency landing. He knew that any sudden actions or panic would raise suspicions, and he was determined to stick to the plan. Sarah's weakening state played into his hands. As the more her symptoms resembled a natural health issue, the less likely anyone would question the situation. By the time the plane began its descent toward Tokyo, Sarah was unconscious, her body limp and pale. Alex's heart raced, not from fear, but from the cold thrill of his success. The final stage of the plan was near, and soon, the truth of what had happened would remain hidden behind the facade of a tragic medical emergency. The perfect crime, 300 feet above the ocean, was almost complete. As the plane began its descent toward Tokyo, the situation inside the cabin grew increasingly dire. Sarah's breathing had become erratic, shallow, and labored, her body trembling as if she were caught in a violent fever. Her hands, once steady and graceful, were now cold and clammy. The confusion and terror in her eyes were unmistakable. She had no idea what was happening to her, only that her body was betraying her in a way that seemed unnatural, as if some invisible force was slowly draining her life. Flight attendants, initially unaware of the full extent of Sarah's condition, now began to gather around her, attempting to assist. One quickly knelt beside her, asking if she had experienced any previous health issues or if she had taken anything that could have caused such a sudden collapse. Sarah could barely respond, her words a tangled mix of panic and pain. The flight attendants, concerned but still relatively calm, signaled to the cockpit to notify Alex of the worsening emergency. Behind the scenes, Alex continued to play his role with unnerving composure. The captain of the plane, trained to handle in-flight emergencies, was well versed in procedures for medical situations. He calmly relayed the information to the flight attendants, requesting that they prepare for a medical intervention upon landing. However, as the descent continued, it became clear that Sarah was not simply suffering from a mild ailment. This was something much worse. Something that didn't fit the usual medical explanations for in-flight emergencies. Sarah's body was going into shock. Her skin had turned a sickly shade of gray, her once bright eyes now sunken and dull. The flight attendants began to whisper among themselves, exchanging nervous glances. Something about the situation didn't seem right. The severity of Sarah's symptoms didn't align with the typical medical emergencies they had encountered on previous flights. The lack of any clear explanation left them with only one conclusion. This was something far more sinister than it appeared. Meanwhile, Alex remained in the cockpit, focusing on the controls with an eerie detachment. He had been preparing for this moment for weeks, carefully orchestrating every detail to make it look like a natural health crisis. His wife's symptoms, the dizziness, the confusion, the shortness of breath, were all part of the plan. The poison he had slowly introduced into Sarah's system had begun to take full effect, and now, as the plane made its descent, he knew that the situation was almost over. He had carefully monitored the timing, ensuring that Sarah would be rendered unconscious by the time the plane touched down. There was no need to panic or rush the descent. Everything was proceeding exactly as he had calculated. Despite the chaos unfolding in the cabin, no one suspected Alex's involvement. He remained calm, cool, and collected, a stark contrast to the growing desperation among the flight attendants and passengers. Sarah's condition continued to worsen with each passing minute, but no one, not even the medical team waiting for them on the ground, could have predicted the truth. The poison, expertly chosen for its delayed effects, had done its job. By the time the plane finally landed and emergency responders rushed to the scene, it was too late for Sarah. Her struggle for survival, though fought with every ounce of strength she had left, was in vain. As the plane touched down and the final moments of her life slipped away, the tragedy seemed like an unfortunate and unexplainable event. But behind the scenes, in the calm and collected demeanor of her husband, lay the true horror of what had transpired. The pilot who had vowed to protect his wife had instead played the role of her executioner. And the perfect crime had unfolded at 300 feet, where no one could stop it in time. When the plane finally touched down in Tokyo, the atmosphere was tense. Emergency medical personnel were waiting on the tarmac, prepared for what they thought would be a routine medical situation. But as soon as they rushed on board and found Sarah's lifeless body, a sinking feeling began to settle in. The severity of her condition was striking, and despite their best efforts, there was nothing they could do. Sarah Mitchell was dead. Initial reports indicated that she had died from an unexplained medical emergency during the flight, something that could happen occasionally at high altitudes. The airline staff, including the flight attendants who had been present during her decline, initially believed it was a case of sudden, acute illness. After all, Sarah had complained of dizziness and nausea, symptoms that were not entirely uncommon on long flights. However, as the authorities began to investigate further, there was something about the situation that didn't sit right. The more they learned about the events leading up to Sarah's death, the more they began to suspect that there might be more to this than just an unfortunate medical event. It was Alex who first spoke to the authorities, recounting the events of the flight with eerie calm. He explained that Sarah had been feeling ill for a while, that she had shown no signs of serious health problems before the trip, and that she had simply gotten worse as the flight went on. He mentioned how he had immediately called for medical assistance upon landing. There was no panic in his voice, no hint of emotional distress. He seemed almost detached, as though he were recounting an ordinary event rather than the death of his wife. As the investigation began, detectives quickly noticed the peculiarities in Alex's behavior. His composure was unsettling. In a situation where most spouses would be visibly distraught, Alex seemed unfazed. His responses were methodical, rehearsed, and free of the emotion one would expect in such a tragedy. His calmness stood in stark contrast to the shock and grief that should have accompanied the loss of his partner. Jezebel. Zavek. The more they dug into his background, the more troubling questions began to surface. Alex's history was scrutinized, particularly his financial situation. Investigators discovered that just months before the flight, he had taken out a substantial life insurance policy on Sarah. The policy was unusually large considering their modest lifestyle, and its terms included a hefty payout in the event of her unexpected death. This raised a red flag, prompting the authorities to take a closer look at Alex's financial motives. Was this just an accident, or had Alex seen an opportunity to collect a fortune? Further inquiry revealed other strange details. Friends of Sarah spoke about her growing concerns in the months leading up to the flight. She had confided in them about her feeling of isolation and her suspicion that Alex was hiding something. Some of her closest friends even mentioned how Alex had become distant, consumed by his work, and seemed more preoccupied with money than their relationship. Sarah had also begun to make plans for her future, suggesting that she might be considering a separation. Could it be that Alex, fearing he would lose control over his wife's wealth, decided to take drastic measures to ensure he remained the beneficiary of her life insurance? The turning point in the investigation came when the toxicology report arrived. The results were chilling. They confirmed that Sarah had died from poisoning. An uncommon and very specific substance had been found in her bloodstream. This was no accident. The poison used in Sarah's death was something that could be administered discreetly over time, something only someone with specialized knowledge could have used. It was a rare substance and only a few people in the world, including Alex, would have access to it. The investigators now had enough to warrant a deeper investigation into Alex's role in Sarah's death. The pieces were falling into place. The financial motives, the behavior before and during the flight, the poison, all pointed to a deliberate act of murder. What had initially seemed like a tragic accident now looked like a carefully planned crime. Alex Mitchell, the man who had sworn to protect his wife, was now the prime suspect in her murder. The investigation was just beginning, but the authorities were already piecing together a horrifying truth. Sarah Mitchell had been murdered by the one person she had trusted most. As the investigation into Sarah Mitchell's death deepened, the authorities quickly honed in on Alex, piecing together a web of evidence that pointed toward a calculated and chilling crime. It wasn't just the toxicology report or the life insurance policy that raised suspicions. It was the more subtle details that began to unravel the facade of a perfect marriage. Every step Alex had taken in the days and months leading up to Sarah's death seemed meticulously designed to cover his tracks. But as detectives dug deeper, it became clear that no amount of preparation could erase the truth. The most damning piece of evidence was the poison found in Sarah's system. The rare substance detected was a slow-acting agent, one that mimicked common symptoms like nausea, dizziness, and shortness of breath. It was designed to be undetectable at first, making it seem like a natural illness. Only someone with knowledge of chemicals and pharmaceuticals could have known how to use such a substance, and Alex, with his extensive training as a pilot, had the perfect expertise. As a professional who understood the complexities of aviation and the potential health risks associated with flight, he was the perfect person to devise a plan that would leave no trace. But it wasn't just the technical aspects that made Alex suspicious. It was his behavior in the wake of Sarah's death. When he was first questioned by the authorities, his calm demeanor seemed out of place. Most spouses, especially in the immediate aftermath of such a tragedy, would have been emotionally shattered. Alex, however, appeared eerily composed, even detached. His responses were measured, almost robotic, and he seemed more focused on explaining the situation than on expressing any genuine grief. This lack of emotional reaction, when coupled with his prior actions, raised red flags for the detectives. In addition to the life insurance policy, which stood as a clear financial motive, investigators began to uncover the deeper dynamics of Alex and Sarah's relationship. Interviews with friends and family revealed that Sarah had been growing increasingly concerned about her marriage in the months leading up to her death. She had confided in close friends about Alex's strange behavior, his growing obsession with money, his detachment, and his secretive nature. Sarah had even made vague remarks about feeling like she was in danger, though she never directly accused Alex of anything. Her intuition, it seemed, had been right all along. As the evidence against Alex mounted, detectives turned their attention to his actions during the flight itself. The timing of Sarah's collapse was crucial. The poison had been slowly working its way into her system over the course of the flight, and by the time she began to exhibit serious symptoms, Alex was already in control. He had no immediate emotional reaction to her suffering. Instead, he carried on with his duties as though nothing out of the ordinary was happening. His calm, collected response to the crisis was not that of a husband trying to save his wife, but that of a man who knew exactly what was going on and who had orchestrated it all. When Alex was finally confronted with the evidence, his demeanor shifted. The carefully constructed narrative he had built began to unravel. The authorities had enough now to charge him with first-degree murder, and the weight of the evidence was overwhelming. The rare poison, his knowledge of its effects, the life insurance policy, and the suspicious behavior in the aftermath of Sarah's death all pointed to one undeniable conclusion. Alex Mitchell had murdered his wife. The revelation shocked everyone who had known the couple. The man who had appeared to be a devoted husband and professional pilot was in reality a cold-blooded killer. Sarah's death, once thought to be an unfortunate medical accident, was now exposed for what it truly was: a carefully planned and executed murder. As Alex was arrested and charged, the world was left to grapple with the unsettling reality that sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones who harbor the darkest secrets. The case of Sarah Mitchell served as a tragic reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that the truth, no matter how carefully hidden, has a way of coming to light. As the case against Alex Mitchell progressed, the shocking truth of Sarah's death rippled through the media, causing a wave of disbelief. People who had known the couple for years were left stunned. Alex had been seen as the perfect husband, someone who, on the surface, seemed to have it all together: a successful career as a pilot, a beautiful wife, a seemingly ideal life. The revelation that he had murdered his wife, orchestrating her death from 300 feet above the ocean, shattered the image of the devoted husband and father that he had cultivated for so long. Alex's trial was swift but intensely public. The prosecution laid out the chilling evidence: the toxicology report confirming the poison, the life insurance policy Alex had taken out on Sarah, and the growing testimony of friends and family about the tension in their relationship. Forensic experts testified that the poison could only have been administered by someone with specialized knowledge, someone who understood how to administer it without raising immediate suspicion. It was clear that Alex had been the architect of his wife's death, coldly and methodically planning it over a period of months. During the trial, Alex remained stoic, offering little in the way of explanation for his actions. He denied any intent to kill his wife, but his defense seemed weak in the face of overwhelming evidence. His lack of emotional response to Sarah's suffering, his detached demeanor during the flight, and his calmness after her death painted a portrait of a man with no remorse. Throughout the proceedings, it became evident that Alex had been motivated not just by financial gain, but by a deeper, darker desire for control. Sarah had become a pawn in his carefully orchestrated plan to secure his future, no matter the cost. In the end, the jury found Alex guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a fate that seemed far less brutal than the one he had inflicted upon his wife. As he was led away in handcuffs, Alex's expression remained unreadable, as if he had never fully grasped the gravity of his actions. For Sarah's family and friends, the verdict was a bitter form of justice. They would never get Sarah back, but at least her killer was held accountable. Sarah's story became a cautionary tale about the darkness that can lurk behind even the most perfect of facades. A reminder that sometimes the greatest danger lies in the ones we trust the most.